So our hero story continues, set amongst a time of political intrigue and sort of horror. We read that there was a Jewish priest called Zachariah, who was a member of a priestly order of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth, who was also from the priestly line of Aaron. Zachariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commands and regulations. It's interesting, isn't it, that we just read over those words, but actually there's an awful lot that maybe we just need to take some time to unpack. When it says that Zachariah was of the priestly order of Abijah, what it's actually referring back to is a point of history. And in 1 Chronicles 24, we see that at the beginning of the First Temple era, David organises all the priests into 24 divisions. And the idea was that every division would serve for 1 week twice a year in the temple, and the rest of the time they would be going about their everyday business. And in about 430 BC, when the priests returned with the other exiles in that horrible period of Israeli history where they were carried into exile, of the thousands of priests that there was probably only about 4,000 priests who returned. And we read of that in Ezra chapter 2. So these 4,000 priests that came back, they began to restructure themselves under the old order of things. And Josephus tells us that by about 4 AD, about the time of our story, this had risen to about 20,000 priests. So 20,000 priests were divided up into different divisions. These divisions, they had about 1,000 priests per division, and they served for 1 week twice a year. And they would serve in the temple. All 1,000 priests would turn up for 1 week and they would take on all the jobs of the temple, including the daily sacrifice. And the daily sacrifice that's being referred to here is what we can read in Exodus 30 verses 7 to 8. And it's if you like, at the end of the day, there's this sacrifice, a beginning and end of the day that's done every day. And the aroma that rises to heaven, it speaks of worship, of coming and daily worshipping God. It talks of sacrifice, of atoning for what's gone on during the day that maybe is sinful. But it also speaks of intercession, of prayer, of crying out to God. And this was a privilege. To be able to go in and offer that sacrifice was a privilege. In fact, it was a privilege that was only allowed to be done once in a priest's lifetime. And it's recorded in the Jewish Mishnah that a priest could only do this daily sacrifice once a year. And if we're honest, most priests probably never ever got to do it. So picture the scene. There's 1,000 priests serving, and they cast lots to see which priest should go and offer the daily sacrifice for their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And on today, Zachariah gets that privilege. This is what he's been working to all his life. This is the highlight that he's been looking forward to. This is the pinnacle of his career. This is the most important moment of his life. Do you begin to get the significance? But we begin to learn something else about this family. Not only is Zachariah a priest who's serving for his once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he's married a priest's daughter. She's from the priestly order of Aaron, and what that basically says is this is a priest's daughter. Now, Zachariah is a priest, but the law only required him to marry somebody from his own people. But he's gone over and above that. He's chosen to marry a priest's daughter. In other words, this is a man who's extra pious. This is a man who's looking for extra brownie points with God. This is a man that actually, what it tells us is, he has a heart that is hungry for God's favour. He's going over and beyond what he needs to do because he's hungry to be right with God. And the passage tells us that they were righteous in the eyes of God. Quite interesting distinction. Righteous in the eyes of God, not righteous in the eyes of people. In other words, what we're learning about Zachariah and Elizabeth is that Zachariah lived for an audience of one. He worshipped for an audience of one. He worshipped God for a sacrificial lifestyle that was surrendered. Because what we read is, it says they were careful to obey all of the Lord's commands and regulations. Again, we might skip over that. But if I was to tell you that there were 613 commandments and regulations, 248 positive, 365 negative. In other words, there was a thou shalt not for every day of the year. But this passage notes that they were righteous in the eyes of God. In other words, God looks at their heart. What we have here is a man who's faithful. He's interested in pleasing God first and foremost, above everything else, not man. But we also realise this is a man of the law. So what we learn in this passage then is that we're reading about a hero. The hero's father himself was a hero. He was passionate for the things of God. He was a righteous man in the eyes of God. He was hungry to please God. And he did what he knew at the time, which was to follow all these laws and regulations. But the passage makes a very clear distinction that he was righteous in the eyes of God. He wasn't just going through the motions of the law. This was a man who had served faithfully all his life. Remember, it tells us he's now an old man. He's served faithfully all his life, and God looks at the heart of a man, and this man who has sought God with all that he's got gets a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.